Endings are one of the toughest, most crucial things to get right in a story. While it's often said that the journey is more important than the destination, I feel that a great ending has the ability to elevate the entire story, turning something that might have been just good to something incredible. They have to wrap up the storyline set up through the narrative, as well as encapsulate a final message the story wants to leave someone with. It's the final thing a person going through the story sees before the credits roll, or close the last page of a book, reflecting back on the journey that came before. Danganronpa v3 Killing Harmomy, the third and final game in the Danganronpa series and fourth mainline entry, because Danganronpa 3 was an anime, had a tumultuous task of not only creating an ending that would fit the game, but also one that would serve as a conclusion to the series. The result? It was extremely divisive to say the least, and caused a split opinion amongst the fanbase. Some adored the ending, others were indifferent, and others hated it, feeling that it ruined the entire game, with some going as far as to say it ruined the entire series. Knowing all these sentiments beforehand, I went into v3 with caution, but also curiosity in mind, interested to see what made this ending so polarizing. And once the credits started rolling after the final chapter of the game, after witnessing the final few minutes of the post-credit scene shortly after, thus concluding the series, Danganronpa v3's ending became one of, if not my favorite ending in fiction. Even despite some of its faults, the ending of Danganronpa v3 Killing Harmony is a love letter to not just the series, but to the storytelling art form as a whole. It uses its themes of truth and lies coexisting, the series' overarching theme of hope triumphing over despair, and people's love of the series, to present an ambitious meta-commentary on the dichotomy fiction and reality play with each other, and the irony how ultimately, for better or for worse, fiction has the power to change reality. It critiques how and why certain media is created and consumed through its depiction of sequelization and toxic fandoms, but also shows the positive emotional impact fiction can have on people around the world. This is the suspenseful, shocking, and divisive final chapter in the Danganronpa series, fittingly titled, Goodbye, Danganronpa. To explain why this finale works so well, we need to go over what Danganronpa's premise is, as the ending serves as a deconstruction of the series. The premise for each game has a group of gifted high school students trapped in a school by a black and white bear named Monokuma, where their only means of escape is to murder one of their classmates and get away with it in a class trial, successfully deceive everyone, and they can go on living freely, while the rest of the students get executed. However, if they are caught, then only they get executed, while the students get to live another day playing the game. The series has an overarching storyline between the first two games, with the next entry, Danganronpa 3 in 2016, being an anime that deviated from the killing game structure and served as an ending to that story. 1 year later, a third game released and seemed to be its own separate thing, this being Killing Harmony. While its narrative structure of the killing game was still intact, a majority of the game's story is disconnected from previous entries, especially thematically. The narrative of 1, 2, and 3 heavily involved hope versus despair, whereas v3 opts to tackle the theme of truth versus lies. All of this culminates to the final trial in the series, where a quarter of the way in drops a big twist, one that shocked the fanbase to its core, and the reason why this ending is still one of the most divisive endings in any video game.
It's fictional. It's all fictional?
All of those events took place within a fictional world known as Danganronpa.
The entirety of Danganronpa is fictional. The stories, characters, all fake. They never happen at all, because they objectively don't exist in real life. Most of these bombshells are dropped by the antagonist Tsumugi, who reveals that not only is the entire series fictional, but also that millions of people were taking enjoyment watching these characters slaughter each other, on top of these characters willingly signing up to be part of this killing game. All of their struggles, all of their storylines meant nothing, because none of it was real, therefore none of it mattered. Understandably, presenting and executing a twist in such a way felt like a slap to the face to fans. After all, mocking fans for being invested in a storyline, only for it to say it was all a meaningless waste, feels insulting. Except there's just one thing. The game doesn't argue that fiction is meaningless. Danganronpa v3 argues the impact and value fiction can have. It's an idea that was built up from the start of the game, with its overarching theme about truth versus lies. While this is by no means a new concept in stories, the way v3 tackles the subjects differs from other media, and that the stance it takes on this theme is both unique and a bit contrarian. While the generic theme of pursuing the truth to overcome lies is still prevalent, it can't be a murder mystery without it, v3 opts to shift its primary focus on showing the nuanced impact lies can have. Some of the common negatives, but also a lot of the unexpected positives as well. Danganronpa v3 is so engrossed with the central idea that the first thing it does is lie to the player when starting the game.
My name is Kaede Akamatsu. Nice to meet me. I'm the protagonist of this crazy story.
Beyond that, the first 5 chapters show lies in a harmful and beneficial light, and concludes how we not only crave, but need lies within our lives, and we get to choose how to view them, whether positive or negative. The final chapter of the game takes this idea to its extreme. After all, what better way to demonstrate the impact lies can have than to reveal that the entire story is fictional, an objective lie. To cement how Danganronpa v3 is arguing about the impact fiction can have, the only character who is stating that fiction is meaningless is Tsumugi, the antagonist of the story, the characters our protagonist and the player are supposed to disagree with. The game actively condemns her mindset. When the characters cave into what she says about fiction being meaningless, it leads to the fake-out bad ending, because that notion about fiction being meaningless is completely false. You then have the protagonist Shuichi arguing that there is meaning to be found within the meaningless, another theme prevalent in each chapter of the game. Kaede knowing that she was the culprit, but still using a trial as a way to encourage Shuichi. Hirumi climbing up the thorn thread, only for there to be no exit. Himiko realizing because she ignored Tenko so much, she can't say her goodbyes when Tenko dies. Gonta seeing how the world was in ruins and escape was pointless. Kokichi's plan to deceive the mastermind being revealed. The result of each of these cases may have not ended up panning out. They all failed in the end. But it's the actions of these characters that empowers the surviving cast, and us viewing the story as well. We can emotionally connect to the lies we see on screen. The ultimate irony is that fiction may not exist in a physical sense, but the impact these stories can have on a person can feel real. This stance, as well as the fiction reveal, serves as a foundation for the core conflict between Shuichi and Tsumugi, that being taking a stand against sequelization and toxic fanbases. Despite Shiragane's stance about fiction being overall flawed, she does make some compelling points about these two topics. It's important to note 2 important twists that help strengthen Danganronpa v3's critiques on the oversaturation of sequels in media. The first being how the V in v3 didn't stand for version, but rather a Roman numeral for 5. The second, and arguably most important aspect, answers the game's mystery on why these characters were thrown in a killing game in the first place. The reason why there's been 53 killing games is because fans wanted more Danganronpa, so the fictional company depicted in the game, Team Danganronpa, creates more and more sequels to meet that demand. Despite feeling devastated whenever we see a character we like tragically die, or turn out to be a murderer, the irony is that we wanted that in the first place. We enjoy watching these high school kids slaughter one another, and we keep buying each entry to see more and more of that. v3 essentially calls out the player for being the cause of why these fictional characters are suffering in the first place, an idea I touched upon in my video about Chapter 4 of v3. However, this seems contradictory to v3's message of fiction impacting people. After all, why go through all that trouble of stating how fiction matters, only for the game to make fun of the player for enjoying Danganronpa beforehand? This is where I believe a lot of the nuance in v3's ending comes from. The main argument the game is making is how fiction can impact reality, but doesn't outright side whether that's a good or bad thing, because in the end, there is no singular answer to that question. This section of the trial builds the conflict the characters have to overcome by demonstrating the dichotomy between what goes into making a story as well as the people consuming said story. if the cycle continues and more sequels keep getting made, it's ultimately detrimental to both the quality of these stories as well as the people consuming them. In terms of a story's quality, there are many different approaches taken with each passing sequel. This can range from trying to one-up its predecessor by creating crazier scenarios or loading the story with fan service whether the narrative calls for it or not. I'd like to note that this is not always the case, and there's nothing inherently wrong with servicing your fans as long as it's a supplement to a strong foundation, or if the narrative justifies its inclusion. They can lead to moments that elevate a story for longtime fans. But when the plot needs to be twisted and contrived in order to force these references just for the sake of having them, then it ultimately does more harm to the narrative being told. Like many of the themes in this ending, these ideas are sprinkled through the course of the game. There are nods and references to things that have happened in past games, and even all the murder cases have some sort of thematic connection to ones in previous games. The whole narrative purpose of the popular character Kokichi Oma was to satirize and mock the tropes of Danganronpa, with his lies convoluting each murder mystery, and his exaggerated and unhinged persona mimicking what people loved about Nagito in Danganronpa 2. Again, I delve more into this in a video I did about the game's 4th trial. But in short, the motivations of his actions were rooted in that he assumed an audience was watching, and that the only way to survive as long as he did was to play into the tropes that the viewers would want from a killing game to entertain them.
At least I wasn't boring, right?
But perhaps the most glaring example of this is through the role the Monocubs and the Hope's Peak storyline fulfill in the overarching plot. For the Monocubs, their reason for being in the story is quite literally that there is no reason for them to be in the story. There's some sort of mystery set up near the beginning of why one of them is killing each other off, before it ultimately devolves, and I kid you not, into an incest plotline, none of which contribute to the greater narrative. The only reason why they exist is because Japanese games like these tend to have marketable mascots to make them more recognizable amongst the crowd. This was basically confirmed by the writer Kodaka when he was answering questions about the game a few years back.
作ってなかったんですけど、まあ結構やっぱ開発からはさきくんとかから欲しいみたいなこと言われるんで、まあじゃあ入れるかと思ったんですけど、プロットも結構考えてたからもう役割ないなと思って5人出したんですけど、まだよくよくこの V3 遊んでみてもらうと分かるんですけど、モノクマズのシーンは全部飛ばしても何の影響もないんですよ。
I believe that this same reasoning applies to tacking on the Hope's Peak storyline of the original Danganronpa trilogy in Case 5, as well as the beginning of Case 6 before the twist, and having Junko be the mastermind once again. Once these elements are introduced, the story starts flying off the rails of everything it's built up. Contrived twists brought up purely to reference past games, odd narrative choices happening after the end of Danganronpa 3, like how Meteor suddenly came down to Earth, cause why not, to even intentionally incorrect retcons and contradictions to the established lore. It demonstrates how the more these plotlines gets referenced and expanded upon in a continuous storyline, the more they spiral into something narratively nonsensical for the sake of including stories and characters people have nostalgia for. Junko being the mastermind once again is the most egregious instance of this. She already died in the first game, then came back to mastermind the second game since she was an AI or something. Then she kicked off everything in the third entry in the flashback storyline. And yet, they brought her back again because...
As history repeats itself, so does Junko Enoshima. Even if it's boring or repetitive, she's always the mastermind, isn't she? Then it's like that this time too. It's gotta be Junko again!
On a meta level, this demonstrates the ridiculousness of bringing her back as the mastermind. Just like the Monocubs, Junko did not need to be in this story. But the only reason she is just because that's how it's supposed to be. As history repeats itself, as Danganronpa repeats itself, Junko will always be the mastermind. As Danganronpa repeats itself, there will always be more mascot characters. These are the faces of the franchise, so despite it being the 53rd time, their inclusions are out of obligation/tradition, and what can sell the most merchandise, rather than telling a coherent story. It ironically took an incoherent twist in order to demonstrate this. There wasn't a need to connect the plots of the previous entries to the story V3 was trying to tell, especially when that particular storyline concluded with Danganronpa 3. And what makes this aspect of the ending even better is that this process of sequelization is apparent now more than ever. Just look at mega franchises such as Star Wars or Marvel, or anything from Disney for that matter. Sequel after sequel, with canonical spin-off movies and TV shows, all building off one another, sharing the same continuity. Whether or not the quality of these storylines is intact is up to the individual person, but trying to keep a logical and satisfying storyline becomes more and more challenging, especially when dozens, yes, dozens of more projects are added on, further adding more weight to this challenge. Suddenly, the 53 in Danganronpa 53 doesn't seem all that implausible. This also applies in regard to incorporating past characters and storylines, as these franchises are littered with references and cameos for the sake of fan service. Not all of these attempts lead to contrived storytelling, but regardless, they're often done solely because a character is popular and they want to keep bringing them into the story, whether it's justified or not. This happened to one of my favorite video game series, Ace Attorney, where after the original trilogy, the writer Shu Takumi was strong-armed into bringing protagonist Phoenix Wright as a supporting character in the 4th entry, which each new game in the new trilogy keeps bringing him back into the fold. On top of compounding new gimmicky and fan service storylines, it creates an overall convoluted narrative. I still enjoy these games, but the magic of the original trilogy has unfortunately been lost. This idea of bringing characters back also applies to supposedly dead ones as well. Take Loki in the MCU for example. This dude dies so many times, and just when you think he's gone for good, he gets his very own TV show. I haven't watched the series myself to know, but whether his inclusion is justified or not, doesn't change how he was brought back merely because he's a popular villain that can sell more toys. Exactly the situation Danganronpa v3 predicted by bringing Junko back as the mastermind with no justification. This whole situation was caused because fiction was impactful enough to become a monumental part of popular culture, but had its meaning quickly devolve into consumerism rather than creating stories from the heart. This creative stagnation caused by trying to please the audience demonstrates how we can influence the stories being told. But as for the inverse, Danganronpa v3 uses the dichotomy between the story and audience, fiction and reality, to present a much more sinister critique about media consumption. While there isn't anything wrong with enjoying a fictional story, the game presents a cautionary tale about how much we devote ourselves and our actions based off of these stories. v3 depicts a world completely enamored by Danganronpa, where people are glued to their screens, sometimes even line up across streets in order to see what happens next. The audience is depicted as entitled and toxic, evident by the way Tsumugi describes them, and the threats they say during the final confrontation.
Don't just end Danganronpa! We supported you! You owe us!
This isn't my Danganronpa. I'm a longtime fan. Do you realize how much I've given to this show? Is Danganronpa really gonna end? You can't just end it out of the blue like this. Just kill each other already. We want more of the killing game. I need that sweet closure. Well, hopefully there's another season. There's no way they'd let it end like this, right?
This portrayal of the audience feels realistic and mirrors a lot of online culture. Just look at any YouTube or social media comment section. You have fans being petty and entitled when voicing outcry and creating petitions when something doesn't go their way. A recent example being how Hideo Kojima fans try to get his game on Xbox cancelled purely because it wasn't on PlayStation. People harassing and sending death threats to actors in the recent Star Wars trilogy because they didn't like their characters, with the same happening to Neil Druckmann and Laura Bailey, writer and actor of The Last of Us Part 2 respectively, another controversial title. Voice actor Griffin Burns' lung collapse being celebrated by Genshin Impact fans purely because the character he voices is unpopular. And this isn't an isolated occurrence for the voice actors in this game either. Or when shortly after the disappointing launch of the game No Man's Sky, several death and bomb threats were so rampant that even the police had to get involved. The list can go on and on. Whether these criticisms towards a creative work is justified or not, the culture about being so upset over a story or character enough to threaten or harm someone's life over it is utterly stupid, because in the end, it's not real. v3 uses this ending to target people who are unable to dissociate actor from character, fiction from reality, and the dangers that come with it. And these are just verbal threats. Sometimes this mentality can fester into entitled fans taking actions that can harm others and themselves. v3 depicts this by having people become so obsessed with the series that they would willingly audition to be a part of the next Killing game. It's revealed that the characters in this Killing game were chosen because they were Danganronpa fans and wanted to be a part of the next entry. With Shuichi's tape in particular, it shows how much she adores the twisted nature of the series, and the detective from the first game, Kyoko Kirigiri, which influenced how his character came to be in this game.
I've always been such a huge fan of Danganronpa and always wanted to be in one. If I were a contestant, I would want to be an ultimate detective. I know there's been a few in the past, and I've always loved those characters. So I would want to be one of them.
Admittedly, this is one of the more messier elements of the ending. Tsumugi clearly states how they're flesh and blood fictional, and we know that's objectively true in our world. But she also states how the characters were originally from the outside world, who volunteered to be in this killing game. So are they real people playing a fictional character, similar to how an actor takes on a role? In that case, they are real people just with amnesia, so not entirely fictional? The execution is sloppy and distracts from the point the game is trying to make with this reveal. With that being said, I was able to look past that because this revelation serves as a terrifyingly strong commentary on toxic fanbases. The audition tapes, as well as the behavior of the audience both in their messages and Tsumugi's description, demonstrates what started out as adoration for the series devolved into an unhealthy obsession, one where people take enjoyment watching the suffering of others over and over again, even to the point of wanting to partake in the obviously dangerous game, wanting the lie of fiction to become the truth of reality. It can be easy to scoff at the way v3 presents the fanbase as overly harsh and unrealistic. And while I think a bit of exaggerating is necessary to emphasize how problematic these kinds of people are, this sort of behavior isn't exactly unfounded either. It may possibly be a small vocal minority, but when it doesn't become just vocal anymore, that can cause major harm to both others and themselves. v3 presenting this issue via a killing game is incredibly fitting now, because 5 years later, Netflix put out a casting call for 456 people to partake in a Squid Game's reality TV series with a large sum of prize money, despite the original TV show being a killing game and goes against the entire message of the show. While I doubt there would be any killings in this reality TV series, I hope, I find it morbidly funny that the exaggerated scenario v3 presented about people's unhealthy addiction to the killing game and companies taking advantage of said addiction was similarly replicated in real life by Netflix. Thankfully, the idea was ridiculed by the vast majority, but the thought that there was likely a few people who thought this was a good idea and wanted to sign up is kinda terrifying. As for an even more extreme example, on April 24, 2021, a man showed up with a knife to the MiHoYo company headquarters in China, the company behind games such as Genshin Impact, allegedly with the goal of stabbing the founders and committing suicide, all over DLC bunny girl outfits in Honkai Impact 3rd. You heard that right, bunny girl outfits. While it was unclear at the time whether it's because the DLC was available everywhere outside of China, or because the outfits didn't fit with the context of the characters, it doesn't change that the idea of someone going as far as to harm others, as well as themselves, all over a piece of media is problematic. The point Danganronpa v3 brings up about the inability to dissociate between fiction and reality leads to an outside world consumed by fiction, which causes the previous examples I mentioned to occur. And even on a smaller, much less severe scale, actions such as putting off work to binge a new TV show or game, which I may be doing right now instead of writing this video, or skipping meals because you were too invested in a story, these are things we might do occasionally in our daily lives. All of it demonstrates how we are prone to being a bit too invested in fiction. Yes, there is value to be had in it, but we shouldn't let that value we put in these stories and characters morph into something damaging, because in the end, they aren't real. They shouldn't consume us to the point where that fiction becomes our reality. All of this is a wonderful examination and meta-commentary of the harm sequelization can manifest thanks to the dynamic between the writer, the story, and the audience. One that couldn't have been done as effectively without shattering the fourth wall between the player who bought this game wanting more Danganronpa. It's a meta-commentary that justifies its point by going meta. All of these points Tsumugi makes during the final trial depict an ugly truth about fiction, how the relationship between storytellers and fans spawn forth sequels and fuel toxic fandoms, the core conflict of this game and the story of v3 in general. However, it also shows the flaws in her argument about how fiction doesn't matter. This entire lengthy section of the trial is essentially establishing how the obsession with fiction created the overall conflict the characters have to go through during the ending, to fight against the entire concept of Danganronpa. That no matter what they do, there will still be more killing games created to entertain those with an unhealthy addiction, torturing these fictional characters within this endless cycle. So how exactly can these characters stop this loop and free themselves from the death game? There's only one single solution, one thing these characters must overcome.
Mastermind?
The mastermind.
Mastermind?
And the mastermind.
The mastermind.
You wanted this killing game, so you have to win, no matter what.
The mastermind.
The mastermind.
The mastermind?
The mastermind.
Mastermind, huh?
But what's considered winning in this game? Beating the other players? No. Beating the game's mastermind is the true victor.
But the real mastermind forcing you to do this is... the people of the outside world! The people of the outside world are the ones who are forcing you to do this!
The only way to win the killing game, and to free these characters from their suffering, is to beat the outside world, the obsessed fans who keep begging for more death games.
I won't forgive this game that treats us like toys. And if this is what the world wants, then I reject that world! I'll fight the world that inflicts suffering for entertainment!
And the way Shuichi goes about achieving this demonstrates the core themes of the game: fiction and reality, lies and truths influencing each other. If the fiction was impactful enough to cause an abundant amount of killing games, then that same impact can be used to convince the audience to end Danganronpa. And to do so, we need to delve further into what makes people love the series, and that's hope. The main driving force of the series is what caused this all. Yes, a major part of why people enjoy death game media in general is to see people get slaughtered and uncover engaging mysteries. But by the end, we want to see the characters overcome all those tragedies, to have hope to move forward and look towards a brighter future. So by letting hope win, it would be giving the audience exactly what they wished for. But if despair wins, the outcome would still be the same, because that's what people expect going into a new Danganronpa entry. It's summed up wonderfully by Shuichi when the character Kibo tries to end the killing game using hope to defeat despair.
Everything is going to be okay. We'll definitely find hope.
What do you mean, hope?
What?
I reject that hope! The reason this madness has gone on 53 times, it's because of hope. It's because the audience wants hope. They want to see hope defeat despair in the end. It's Hope's Peak Academy all over again. So if we fight for hope, we just be giving them what they want. And the killings will never end.
It's because that hope was powerful enough to move so many people that this killing game keeps going. The fiction was powerful enough to change reality. The game doesn't inherently say this is bad either. Shuichi mentions how this hope gives the audience viewing Danganronpa courage. It's the fundamental theme of the series that so many people in the audience the game depicts, and in real life, fell in love with. And there's nothing wrong with that. Quite the contrary, actually, as v3 delves into later. However, it's the 53 times hope moved forward, the 53 times the suffering continued for these characters, as well as people in the outside world endangering themselves and others. The empowering fiction turned into a necessary obsession. That is what's problematic. It all ties back to sequelization and consumerism the game wants to critique. People loved and felt empowered by the stories of the first few Danganronpas, how the hope overcame despair, so they wanted more, and the people who made it gave them just that. It becomes an endless cycle of both sides feeding and harming each other. The fiction had meaning. That's how the entire conflict started in the first place. But as the cycle continued, this piece of fiction about hope overcoming despair lost its meaning, its soul as tales to positively entertain and inspire people. So the only way to stop this cycle is to create an ending that rejects the notion of hope and despair entirely, rejecting the entire premise of Danganronpa itself. To create an ending so unsatisfying that fans don't want another sequel.
We won't let it end the way they want. We won't make a good ending or a bad one. To end this killing game and end it forever, we will reject Danganronpa.
We see this reaction applied across many different franchises that had less than stellar entries and endings. Before I delve into them, I like to note that I haven't watched any of these series myself. I'm going off what I saw the consensus to be. Solo: A Star Wars Story was considered a box office bomb by Star Wars standards, with it being safe to assume it contributed to why there's been a lack of theatrical spin-off movies since. Or even with the mainline films, as they became more divisive, ticket sales dwindled with each passing entries, and plans for future films have been in flux ever since. And then we have the ending to one of the most popular TV shows of all time, Game of Thrones, where the ending was so unsatisfying for many that it killed a lot of people's interest in seeing any more stories in this universe, specifically by these writers. Even now with the new spin-off show years later, people are approaching it with caution. Of course, this isn't always the case, with some works with near unanimous praise tanking, while others that were panned making tons of money. But generally, if people don't like something, they'll be less inclined to check out the next.
This ends without a single vote being cast for hope or despair. The audience would hate it. They'd never accept an ending like that.
There's a clever segment near the end where the player has to literally stop playing the game, stop playing Danganronpa in order to progress, showing that the only way to end the killing game is to not play the game entirely, depriving the audience of the entertainment they wish for. This is a strong callback to Kokichi's actions during Case 4, where by revealing the culprit prematurely, he attempts to ruin the murder mystery he knew the audience wanted in this murder mystery story.
If I can't win this game, then I'll make it boring for everyone. That's my revenge.
Fine, be bored. We're not here for your entertainment. We're trying to survive. You're the ones who want us to be entertaining. If you're gonna complain, perhaps you should just stop watching. Even if we have to make the entire audience hate us, we're not going to stop.
But at the same time, Shuichi is aware that in order to have this outcome last, the audience would have to respect the character's decision to break free from this cycle. To achieve this, V3 wants to remind us of its initial truths within the series' roots, to remind us what made Danganronpa and fiction in general special in the first place. Except this time, to appreciate it in a much healthier fashion. Fiction itself may be an objective lie, but they can affect and teach us lessons on an emotional level, sometimes more effectively than reality. This is the truth Danganronpa v3 wants to teach within its lie. These stories have the power to stand the test of time, so let them stand the test of time. We don't need killing game after killing game, sequel after sequel in order to teach us these same messages over and over again. The impact these fictional stories can have on us don't have to be meaningless. They don't just disappear once they're done. They can linger, bring meaning to us, as long as we see meaning within it.
Even if this is fiction, even if we're all fictional, the pain in my heart is real. The sadness I feel when I lose the people I love is real.
That is the truth Danganronpa v3 wants to teach with its lie. And the only way to preserve this truth, preserve the meaning fiction provides, as well as stop the audience from wanting more death games, is to convince them that these characters and the lessons they learn will live on even after their stories come to a close. Shuichi as a character is a direct representation of this. His growth as a protagonist stemmed from fictional characters guiding him along through this fictional story. We get to see him grow and change from a weak detective afraid of revealing the truth to a person who's confident in pursuing that truth, and then ultimately, someone who is bold enough to confront the truth with the lie, to stop this needless slaughter. And us as the people viewing the story get to internalize these messages as we see Shuichi grow, as he indirectly instills those same values to us, just like how he did to the other characters. He inspired Himiko by telling her to fight for the truth, a message taught to him by Kaede. He inspires Maki by telling her to believe in herself and her feelings, a message taught to him by Kaito. And finally, he tries to inspire and change the minds of the outside world by telling them to believe in a lie, to believe in the feelings fiction can bring to us, an idea embodied by the character of Kokichi. Even though the whole story of Danganronpa is fake, even though Shuichi and all of the characters are fake, the core themes the game wants to teach are real, and we can learn something from seeing his story unfold. These are the truths the story wants to teach with its lie. Fiction has the power to change reality, to teach us inspiring and impactful messages that resonate with us long after the credits roll.
It may not be a physical power, but our wish will surely be received by someone. If fiction has the power to touch people's hearts, then that power can change the world.
Moreover, fiction can be even more effective at teaching these lessons than reality itself. There's a reason why so many parents plop their kids down to watch Disney movies. They're filled with positive messages that's much easier to convey because they're entertaining to a child. Or we have folktales such as The Three Little Pigs, teaching us how hard work, patience, and perseverance pays off. This story is objectively a lie, completely made up. And yet, there are truths in this story we should live by. Which was able to teach that truth better? The lie where it has pigs talk and use construction tools, or the truth, where sometimes those who work hardest fail to persevere, while those who loaf around reap the benefits? Fiction or reality? Fiction is able to teach us important lessons in a low-stakes fashion. We see a character go through a made-up struggle to learn these morals and see their growth pay off in an ideal scenario. And as the audience sees everything unfold, we can internalize these messages and apply them to our daily lives, to allow these stories and characters to affect us past just the fiction. And even beyond that, these stories can be a source of bringing people together, whether it's to teach these same values to other people, or being united and talking about a story you love with another. One instance of this that really stuck out to me was in cities in Mexico, Brazil, and other countries in Latin America a few years back. When the final few episodes of Dragon Ball Super were being released, public screenings were set up, some even by the government themselves, to let excited fans watch the conclusion to the show they loved. Hundreds, even thousands of people were packed to watch two buff aliens slap each other a bunch of times, to see another story about growth and triumph through perseverance, the truth of that fiction. We have people yelling in excitement during the epic moments, chanting character names whenever they do something stunning, and an eruption of celebration when the battle ends with their heroes victorious. Seeing people come together over what's objectively a lie is something that's incredibly heartwarming, and shows the emotional impact these stories can have on people. It's just like the example v3 presented with the crowd cheering watching Danganronpa, but instead of it feeling something toxic, it's instead something wholesome. And that's the most important distinction the game strives towards in showing the power of fiction. Just like how there's an abundance of negative examples of the impact fiction can have, there's also an abundance of positive ones as well. The Dragon Ball story is just one of many that shows the power these creative works can have to resonate with people. You have people cheering in movie theaters, fans lining up at midnight for a release of a book or game. Hell, the whole entire concept of a convention is bringing people with the same shared love interests and stories in one place. And on a smaller, more emotional scale, you have people saying how a piece of media has helped them make long-lasting friendships, or even helping them through difficult times, even saving people's lives, being the one thing keeping them going. The hope fiction can bring to people is endless. It doesn't matter if the story is fake, it doesn't matter if none of it actually exists. The emotions, the feelings we feel, it can all be real, as long as we want it to be.
If we can change reality, then we won't be just fiction. Our lives will have significance. And hopefully, my feelings will have significance too.
That is the relationship fiction and reality should have with each other. We don't need sequel after sequel to have these messages stick. We shouldn't let fiction consume our lives where we perform harmful actions in devotion to them, like how v3 depicts the outside world. Nor should we dismiss the value fiction has entirely, like Tsumugi. There is hope to be found within a lie, while we live in a despairing truth. That's what I love about the conflict between Tsumugi and Shuichi. While I think Tsumugi is a weak antagonist overall, the thematics behind their argument is coated with this irony the game is dripping with. We have the cosplayer and writer Tsumugi, an occupation rooted in presenting lies, trying to show the ugliness of the truth. And then we have the detective Shuichi, an occupation rooted in presenting truths, trying to show the beauty of a lie. This is why the ending, despite some of its many faults, means so much to me. Fiction has been an important part of my life pretty much since the start. Some of my closest friendships I made were started because we all had similar interests in games and movies. One of the earliest and most meaningful moments I can think of was when I had to switch elementary schools, and me being afraid of meeting new people was terrified. But on the first day, when I sat down in my assigned seat and the person in front of me asked the table if we liked Pokemon, that moment became the start of a friendship that has lasted strong over a decade. And that was able to springboard us into becoming even closer friends beyond the piece of media we enjoyed. fiction and reality going hand in hand. These stories have been a constant in my life, no matter what I'm going through. Whenever I'm down, I can always turn to fiction to meet new characters and see them learn and grow and connect with them even through the barrier of the screen, and let that inspire and lift my spirits up again. This is why I love this ending so much. It's validating what fiction can mean for so many people, what it means to me. No other characters embodies this message to me more than Spider-Man, my favorite fictional character of all time. I know, pretty generic statement, but this character has been in my life since the very beginning. But spoiler alert, Spider-Man isn't real. None of the stories he goes through are real. They're all objectively lies. But this lie, his stories about good prevailing over evil, while not necessarily anything groundbreaking, they were able to teach hundreds and millions of people to do the right thing. That anyone can be a hero that inspires others to hold on just a second longer. That with great power comes great responsibility. That is the truth the stories of Spider-Man wants to teach with its lie. That is the truth that so many people looked up to. Once again, which is more effective at teaching that truth? A reality where bad people go unpunished, and where the kindness of good people go unrewarded? Or the fiction, where even through all his hardships, even sometimes when the whole world is against him, this wonderful icon keeps moving forward with optimism and empathy towards others, because that's the right thing to do. It's the reason why I watch every movie's Thursday night showing, the reason why I stand in line for the launch of every new game, the reason why I spent so much time sitting in the library and bookstores reading his stories, because those lessons inspired me. And with new iterations of Spider-Man, with new and more diverse people wearing that mask, these messages are able to resonate deeper for so many more people. Fiction empowering reality is ultimately the theme that Danganronpa v3 teaches. These messages and all the examples I brought up show that by being able to dissociate truth from lie, to not let fiction consume us, only then can we believe in the feelings these stories give us, to let fiction influence our reality, to use these lies to leave a positive impact on the world. The entire point of the game was all foreshadowed by Kaede during Chapter 1, when they were taking the elevator down towards the first trial.
I think everyone is afraid of learning the truth. But the people who are willing to find the truth are the ones who can decide their fate. If you never know the lies from the truth, then you can't choose a path. You won't even know you're on a path. So, fight for the truth. Even if it is frightening. I know you can do this. If you're scared, borrow the strength of others who will be there to help you. Think of everyone you're helping, and let that be your strength.
Our friends who died gave us their love, and we changed because of that. If we can inspire change in others, then that love will live on. That love will tear down the wall between fiction and reality, and it will live on forever. Even if this whole story is a lie, I will use that lie to change the world.
Danganronpa will never end, will it?
Together, we're gonna end Danganronpa!
And so, the story of Danganronpa comes to a close. The story ends abruptly after 53, with the fiction and the characters being destroyed, thus ending the killing game forever. And once the credits roll, it shows a very bittersweet scene of the audience dispersing from the screen, with some of them even waving back towards the camera. The game then boots itself back to the title screen, with nothing left to be.
Are you okay?
Yeah, somehow. Hey, how were we saved? Why are we still alive?
Yeah, why are we alive? I wonder...
The killing game is over, the class trials are over, and the fictional world is over. So then, where are they? The characters stand looking at the rubble of the school, the ruins of Danganronpa. The killing game has ended, the battle of hope and despair that tortured these fictional people and impacted the lives of people in reality, for better or for worse, has ended. If the point was to end everything, then why are these characters standing here? There's nothing for them to be alive for. I didn't take this scene in a literal sense, but more as a metaphorical one. This is what happens after the end of every piece of fiction, beyond when the narrative is over. evident by how the screen shuts off before the epilogue starts. The hole in the sky these characters are looking towards is literally the bridge between fiction and reality, how the characters can coexist between both planes, and how we in reality are the ones who choose to let their stories into our lives.
Aren't we proof of that? In this fictional world, we overcame all these fictional struggles, but those things changed us, and we were able to change the world. So it doesn't really matter where the truth ends and where the lies begin. If lies can change the world just as well as the truth can, then lies are just another way of telling the truth. We stand with one foot in fiction and one foot in reality.
Whether you love this ending to the point where you dedicate an entire video praising it, or hate it so much where you pretend it doesn't exist, we get to decide what to take from fiction once it ends. The remaining three talk and reminisce about everything they experienced through the Killing game, all the lessons they learned on the way, serving as a recap of what this ending was trying to achieve. Fiction itself is a lie, but the love and feelings we put into it allows these stories to transcend past their fictional barrier and teach us truths that resonate with us in reality, just like what Danganronpa has done for so many people. We shouldn't dismiss the power these stories have to impact people. Hey, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of Danganronpa, but it was ironically this divisive ending that made me appreciate the series on a much deeper level. The Killing game structure and the character writing never really clicked with me, and the stories between the first three entries I found were too safe and predictable. But for all my criticisms, it doesn't change the fact that the story of Danganronpa, the story of Hope's Peak, and the idea of holding on to hope in the face of overwhelming despair, that was able to connect and inspire millions of people. You have this fictional story live on through the people who loved it in reality. Whether it's people making fan art, music covers, writing fanfiction, headcanons, or the many videos you can find on YouTube of people talking about the series just like this one. The fiction was able to impact so many people in reality in such a positive manner. It's the main reason why I started this YouTube channel in the first place. Fiction is something that means so much to me, and making these videos allows me to share that love I have for stories to others. It's easy to trash on something we don't like. Understandably so. It's how we feel, and there's nothing wrong with disliking something. But it's also important to remember that a series or entry we hate could be someone else's favorite. It could have impacted their lives in a way our criticisms can't compare. I personally believe that is much more meaningful. Despite the scrutiny we may give it, in the end, that piece of fiction was still able to do its one job. It was able to entertain and affect someone, whether it's millions, hundreds, or even just one person. Whether it's a majority opinion, something that's divisive, or one that goes against the consensus, its purpose was still achieved. With that being said, we shouldn't let it turn into an unhealthy obsession and revolve our entire lives around them. We still live in reality. Fiction and reality can work hand in hand, and we should reap the benefits of both. One foot in fiction, one foot in reality. The last image contains beautiful symbolism of the characters stepping out of the world of fiction through the fourth wall created by Team Danganronpa, and then into the minds of us, the people witnessing the story unfold in reality. Even after their stories end within the confines of fiction, they still live on through us, whether it's keeping their ideals in mind or creating something new out of them. And so, the characters take that step going from their world to ours. Thus, the story lives on. I'm sure even now, it lives on there as well. Thus, the story lives on. Was this lie able to change something? Was this lie able to change someone? Was this lie able to change the world? If it was able to change even the smallest thing, then the story isn't over.